All right, time is right. It's a Wednesday night. It's 8:30. We're on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com for the Panther-Lair Show. Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. We are tuned in. We are live, and hopefully it looks like we've got volume. It looks like we've got audio. It looks like we've got video. It looks like we've got everything we could possibly need to make it a great show tonight. Get our camera seem a little off-centered and foggy. I don't know. Looks like our screen. Try and get that. Yeah, for some reason, it looked like our camera was a little foggy. Might have to actually get around to cleaning the camera on the Panther-Lair.com machine here at some point in the near future. But thanks everybody for coming in here on a Wednesday night. It's the final week of spring camp. Blue Gold game at Heinz Field on Saturday, so there's that to look forward to, and certainly that to talk about. And we've got a lot to break down from that, on that topic tonight. Hope everybody's had a good week so far. Hope everybody's been enjoying it and looking forward to Heinz Field on Saturday. I don't know what the weather's supposed to be for the spring game. I see different things. Let's look at the latest weather forecast for Saturday. 45 degrees with a 50% chance of snow. Oh, that's great. Who knows what it'll actually be, though? I mean, everything could change between now and then. Certainly could change between now and tomorrow. You know, the weather forecast might be different at the end of this show than it is, right now. And by the time you listen to this podcast, you watch this video on Thursday or Friday or whenever it is, you might have a completely different forecast for Saturday. Either way, they're going to have a spring game on Saturday. It's going to be at Heinz Field. It's going to start at 1 o'clock. It's going to be blue versus gold. And earlier today on Wednesday, they announced the rosters. They drafted the rosters. So we're going to talk about that process, what stood out in the blue-gold game draft, what to look for in the blue-gold game, what to expect, what not to expect, what you will see, what you won't see, what you should hope to see, what you should hope not to see. We got a lot to break down from every angle on this blue-gold game. And if you have questions, be sure to put them in the chat here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, like and subscribe and comment and review and do all those things that people ask you to do for their YouTube channels, because it helps. It helps get the word out and draw more attention and get people in here on Wednesday nights and liven up the conversation and get even more participants. And that's what we like to see here on the Panther-Lair Show. Of course, the website, it's right here at the bottom of the screen, Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, recruiting. We cover it all at Panther-Lair.com, and of course, message boards where you can interact with hundreds and thousands of your closest Pitt fan friends. I mean, it's all day, every day. There's something going on Panther-Lair.com. It's all day, every day. There's conversation happening on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. I really think it is the best online community for Pitt fans that you're going to find. I think if you're a Pitt fan, you like to talk to other Pitt fans, you like to talk about Pitt sports. I mean, this is the place to do it. The message boards, Panther-Lair.com. So you subscribe to the site, you get access to all the content, the news, the interviews, the analysis, the film breakdowns, the recruiting updates, all the different things that we publish daily on Panther-Lair.com. And then you go over to the message boards and you talk about all of that stuff. You know what I mean? You read the film breakdown on what Nellie Cummings is going to bring to Pitt. And then you go to Panther-Lair.com, and then you go to the message boards and you talk about it. So it kind of, we give you everything you could need. The information, the content, I guess, and then the opportunity for conversation, communication with other Pitt fans. Panther-Lair.com. I imagine a lot of people from Panther-Lair.com are going to be at the spring game on Saturday. Those in the local area will be there, I'm sure. Those, I think there'll be plenty who come in from out of town to go to the spring game and see this Pitt football team in action live and in person for the first time in 2022. And I'll say it right off the bat, and it's something that you probably don't need to be told. It's something that I think virtually every coach in college football adheres to. And certainly Pat Narduzzi, who, Pat Narduzzi never met an outsider to the program who he wasn't suspicious of. And that's no discredit to him. I mean, we got a picture of him right there on the screen. You can see there's Pat. And there he is again, second picture in a row. I don't want to say he's skeptical or paranoid or something like that, but he's very protective of secrets of the program because he feels like that's what he needs to do in order to win. And my approach with coaches and their adherence to secrecy and their paranoia and desire to keep everything in-house, what I've always said is that, look, I have watched every minute of every practice in the offseason for teams that went 5-7. I've watched every minute of every practice in the offseason for teams that went 10-3. I've watched, no practice. I've gotten, kept out of practice entirely for a team that went 5-7. And I've gotten kept out of a practice entirely for a team that went 11-3. I really don't think media observation is as big of a threat to the life of a college football program or the success of a college football program as some coaches believe it to be. But what I've always said is that while I believe that to be true, I also believe that this guy is getting paid millions of dollars to operate this program in the way he sees best, as best he sees fit. And if Narduzzi believes that the thing he needs to do to win is keep everything secret and everything quiet and everything in-house, go ahead. And that applies to the spring game. I mean, it applies to the media because we get to watch about the first half hour of practice every day. And let me tell you, it's riveting to watch them stretch. It really is. You want to get your finger on the pulse of a football team, watch those guys stretch. You will find out. You can tell if a team is championship team by how they stretch. But if that's what Narduzzi wants to do, that's his prerogative. It's his program to run. If he feels like we should leave after period 5 and not watch any 7-on-7, okay. That's his program to run. And the guy just won an ACC championship, so I guess he kind of has, we have to default to him at least, or defer to him at least for a little while. But of course it extends to the spring game as well. And he has never wanted to show much in the spring game. I mean, Narduzzi, we've seen plenty of years in the past when they've gone into that season opening FCS game and he doesn't want to show anything there. You know what I mean? They would play completely vanilla. 2016 was a great example. They opened against Villanova. They won the game like 28-7. They got a touchdown off a kickoff return. So they really only scored 3 offensive touchdowns. And you came out of that game saying, good Lord, is this what the offense is going to be this year? And obviously, they held a lot back in that game because they go out the next week against Penn State and they have a whole new game plan and have things that we never even had an idea they were going to run. And they ran it really well, and that became their offense for the year. So he has held things back. Narduzzi has held things back in regular season games. You can bet a whole lot that in the spring game, happening in April, 4 months, 5 months before the season starts, 4 months before the season starts, or 5, I guess, particularly when it's going to be televised and easily recorded and reviewed and watched, you can believe you're not going to see anything. Now, we always say that. We always talk about the vanilla game plan. We always talk about, they're not going to show anything. They're not going to show anything. And, I mean, Dave Wanstead even. You could go back to Dave Wanstead. He would play it close, keep it close with the spring game, of not showing too much of what they wanted to do on offense or what they wanted to do on defense. The reality is, for you and for me and for just about everybody else who's going to be in that stadium who's not on the sidelines on Saturday, it's going to be hard for us, I think, to really ascertain how vanilla the spring game really is, how vanilla the offense is. Now, it might sort of be shown through by a lack of productivity, that they don't really get many explosive plays, that they don't really score many points. I mean, we've seen some spring games in the past under Narduzzi that have been a little boring. Was it 2016? It might, no. What year was it? A couple years ago, where the spring game, I think the final score was 10-3. And the only touchdown was scored was right at the end. Dane Jackson scored on a pick 6. And so there wasn't much offense that day. And it's reasonable to believe that there probably won't be much offense on Saturday. Now, they've got guys who can make plays. They've got quarterbacks who can make throws. They've got some really good wide receivers on this team and some really good running backs. O-line depth has taken a hit because they've got, I think, at least 3 starters who aren't, 3 projected starters in Owen Drexel and Gabe Hoy and Jake Cradle who aren't going to participate on Saturday in the spring game. And I think all that stuff is, just being cautious, just being careful. You don't want to take anybody who's maybe a little banged up and get them a lot banged up because you put them out there. There's no reason for a guy who's somewhat limited or less than 100% to go out and play at Heinz Field on Saturday. So you're not going to, and the list is a long one. I think I tweeted it. Let me bring it up here. Of the guys who are not going to participate on Saturday: Tyler Bentley, Judson Tallender, Jake Cradle, Gabe Hoy, Owen Drexel, Branson Taylor, Rodney Hammond, Nate Yarnell, Terrence Moore, Buddy Mack, Marquand Pope, Javante Royal, Stephon Hall, and Taylon Brooks, who is a walk-on I'm not really familiar with. So that's what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 guys who are not participating. And the number could actually grow by Saturday. They could have one or two other guys who get a little banged up either between now and then, or maybe they're nursing something, and they just decide to hold them out. And on top of that, you've got your Jordan Addison, is the first one, very obvious one, he's not going to play a lot on Saturday. Maybe a series, if that. I wouldn't be surprised if guys like Habakkuk Baldonado and Kalijah Cansey see minimal time. Servassier Dennis might see minimal time, just because there's no need for those guys to play. You'd like to apply that also to the other two projected starters in the offensive line of Carter Warren and Marcus Minor. But if you take those guys out, you're already out Cradle, Hoy, Drexel, Branson Taylor, Terrence Moore. You're already out 5 offensive linemen straight out that aren't going to play. If you take Warren and Minor off the field, you're not going to have many offensive linemen left to actually participate in this spring game. Maybe they should make the spring game a 7-on-7. I don't really, your defensive linemen, I think those guys are all good, and it's a deep position. They don't really need to, I think you could make a case that most of them don't need this spring game. Get your offensive linemen out there and just go get them out of there, I'm saying. And just go straight 7-on-7. Quarterbacks, receivers, running backs, tight ends. It'd be more fun to watch. Be more exciting, right? They're probably not going to do that. But they might have to if they start running short on offensive linemen. So my point is, it's not going to look like a lot out there. It's hard to set expectations very high on what you're going to see when you know that A, they're going to severely limit the playbook, and B, you're going to have a lot of guys who don't participate. And all those things make sense. I think as fans, certainly as media, we want to see something. We want to get a show. We want some guys to stand out, some guys to be really good and exciting to watch. But the reality is what's best for Pitt and what's best for Pitt's chances in 2022 is that those 14 guys plus Addison and Baldonado and Cansey and Dennis and maybe a couple others, what's best for Pitt in 2022 is that those guys do not participate on Saturday. As much as the fans want to see them on Saturday, as much as the fans want to get a little taste of what they've been up to since the Peach Bowl, as much as the fans just want something to dig into in the offseason, I think most fans recognize that it's much better to save those players and have them healthy and available than take a chance of something weird happening in the spring game on Saturday. Now, the other thing that always comes up with these Pat Narduzzi spring games is the format and specifically how it impacts the offensive line. So if you've been following Pitt since, if you've been following Pitt since Pat Narduzzi got here, you know what the format is for the spring game. More particularly, how they set the rosters and how they put these teams together. And what it comes down to, it's a draft. So it starts off, Pat Narduzzi chooses the head coaches for each team, the gold team and the blue team. Chooses a head coach. The head coaches then draft the rest of the coaching staff out. And then those coaching staffs, so like the blue team now, Frank Signetti's the head coach, Dave Borbely, Andre Powell, Randy Bates, and Archie Collins are on his staff. And then those guys draft the seniors. So that blue team staff and the gold team staff draft out the seniors. So you start with the blue and gold having, a bunch of seniors. I don't know what the number ended up being. I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, maybe like 14 on the blue team and, about 14 on each, actually, with a couple of injured guys in there. to go with it. So you draft out the seniors, and then you get together on Wednesday, which was today, and you have the draft. And during the draft, the seniors all get together and they draft their teams. So the seniors for the blue team were Servassier Dennis, Keaton Slovis, Habakuk Baldonado, Eric Hallett, Devin Danielson, Chris Maloney, Brandon George, Blake Zabovic, Jake Cortez, Dakota Peters, Kmar Mims, Tyler Bentley, Judson Tallender, and Jake Cradle. And so those guys were sort of the GMs. And I don't think all 14 of them were there today, but they draft their team and they go back and forth. And the way the draft works is whoever's up, I think blue team won the coin toss, so they picked first. And their first pick was Bengali Kamara. Okay? So when Bengali Kamara was drafted, that opened the position of outside linebacker. And then what happens is they'll go back and forth, blue, gold, blue, gold, blue, gold, drafting until all the outside linebackers are gone. And then once that's done, you go to the next pick, which ended up being safety. The gold team, after you went back and forth to get all the outside linebackers out, the gold team opened with safety. They took P.J. O'Brien, and then the blue team took Brandon Hill, and they went back and forth until that was done. And then it was the blue team's turn to open a new position. They opened tight end, took Gavin Bartholomew. And so it went on until all the positions had been drafted. And you go this way so everybody makes sure they get enough players at each position. And you don't want just one team focusing on taking all the quarterbacks and then the other team has no quarterbacks at all. And so this has been the format. Since Pat Narduzzi got here, it was something they used to do at Michigan State when Narduzzi was with the Spartans, and now they do it here at Pitt. And it's fun on a lot of levels. It sets up some interesting strategy. It's interesting to see how the players approach the strategy. It's interesting to see what the players think of each other. Bengali Kamara was the first overall pick. That's interesting to me. It's interesting. Now, some of the linebackers were not available. Servassier Dennis had already been assigned to a team as a senior. Brandon George had already been assigned to a team. Shane Simon had already been assigned to a team. Jackson Henry and Miles Canton, a couple walk-ons, had already been assigned to a team. But for Servassier Dennis's team to look at it and say, okay, we got to get Bengali Kamara on our team. And some of it's strategy or picking the position that you want to draft, not just the individual player. But that tells you a little something about Bengali Kamara and maybe where he stands and how his teammates view him. And we've talked about Kamara all spring. He's been one of the sort of breakout players this spring. I think he's in line for a big season in the fall as a starting money linebacker. He played well late in the year. He played quite a bit in the Peach Bowl, and I think he did well in that game. But seeing it now after 13 practices, seeing his teammates say, this is the guy we have to get on our team. We have the first pick. We are going to take the first overall pick in the draft. We got to get the right guy, the guy that our team really needs at a key position. And they went with Bengali Kamara. It's interesting to me. You know what I mean? That's notable. So you get a sense of that when you watch this draft. You get that's interesting they went with that first. It's interesting the gold team then went to safety. It's interesting the blue team then went to tight end. And then the gold team went with wide receiver, and they took Konate Mumfield as the first receiver off the board. And, so you go on and you get a lot of interesting insight into the team. And the downside, though, and this particularly relates to the offensive line, is that things get kind of mixed up. And if there's anything that's important, and we know it's important because we've talked about it a lot this offseason, continuity is so important on the offensive line. Cohesiveness is so important on the offensive line. And while I think the coaches do mix up the depth chart a little bit or mix up who's running with the ones, who's running with the twos, obviously they had injuries this spring. And so guys like Drexel were out or Gabe Hoy was out. Because you want guys to get comfortable practicing next to each other and practicing with different guys. But at the end of the day, you've got your five. And you want those five to be together. But when you do it with this format, what you end up with is something a little bit more jumbled up. So the blue team offensive line, actually, let's start with the gold team because that's a little bit less horrifying. The gold team offensive line, Carter Warren at left tackle, Marcus Minor at left guard. That's great, right? Matt Matrosky at center. He's a walk-on. Ryan Jacoby at right guard. He's a transfer from Ohio State who came in last year, played a little bit late in the season, actually has impressed the coaches. He's going to be one of the guys to watch, is Ryan Jacoby, the right guard for the gold team. And then Ryan Baer, the early enrolling freshman, is basically the starting right tackle for the gold team. So you go Warren, Minor, Matrosky, Jacoby, Baer. That's your starting offensive line, projected starting offensive line for the gold team. The blue team, this is going to be... This is how I project them. I mean, I don't know how they'll end up lining up. I think they'll have Matt Gonsalves at the starting left tackle, Terrence Enos at left guard, Matt Altsman, a walk-on at center, Blake Zabovic at right guard, and Jason Collier at right tackle. Gonsalves, Enos, Altsman, Zabovic, Collier. They're going to be going against... That offensive line is going to be trying to block Deslin Alexander, David Green, DeAndre Jules, and John Morgan. Backed up by Bam Brema and a handful of other guys that are pretty impressive. That's going to be... Yeah, that's going to be a mess. The blue team offensive line is a mess. And it's because of how this format went. So, I mean, when you look... Once the offensive linemen started getting drafted... I mean, there were only 2 guards to get drafted. Because most of the other guys were seniors, and Ryan Jacoby got drafted first by the gold team, and then Terrence Enos got drafted by the blue team for the guards, and then they opened the tackles. The blue team took Gonsalves, the gold team took Ryan Baer, and then kind of back and forth, Jason Collier to the blue, and a couple, what's his name, George French, a walk-on, and then Trey Anderson. So there weren't a lot of options available. The seniors were already kind of in place. You have a bunch of guys that are hurt, and the end result, even though it's compounded this year by the injuries, the end result is kind of what it always is that the offensive lines are all jumbled up, and so you get something less than ideal protection packages. And so you put all these factors together. You've got a limited playbook, not going to show a lot in terms of plays, not going to show a lot in terms of protections. You get the jumbled up offensive line, which is what always happens in these spring games due to these drafts. You get, compounded by Drexel, Cradle, Hoy, and Taylor being out due to injuries. And you've got pretty dicey situation on the offensive line. It's not good for either one of these teams. It's not good. There's a lot I like about both of these rosters, but that part is not good. And that's really the biggest negative to this format. Of the draft process. Overall, I like it a lot. I think it's interesting. I think it's fun. I think it tells you a lot about who, like I say, what the players think of their teammates. And you get some interesting insights there for sure. But the downside is the level of play probably takes a bit of a hit when you are, mixing up, particularly the offensive lines like this. Now, like I said, that blue team offensive line really scares me, particularly when they're going against, they're not going against Baldonado and Hayes, but they are going against Alexandra and Morgan. Bam Brema went to the gold team, who I think is going to be one of the guys to keep an eye on, number 57. He was drafted as a defensive end, but he can play end or tackle, so he's going to move around there. Sam Okunlola is on the gold team defensive line, number 17. That's not Rashad Weaver, but he might make a few plays that remind you of it a little bit. In D tackle, I think DeAndre Jules, number 90, can be really good. I think David Green is on that team, so that's going to be your starting tackles. They don't have Kalijah Cansey. Cansey's on the blue team, but I don't know how much Cansey's really going to play. And so I look at that matchup, gold defensive line against blue offensive line, and I just say, even if the blue has some advantages, I think, in the back seven defensively, I think that gold defensive line should have some success against the blue offensive line, and I kind of give the gold team a little bit of a nod because of that. The other thing that I think favors the gold team here is the wide receivers. And I say that with the blue team having drafted Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison, in the draft, was actually third to last wide receiver taken. Konate Mumfield went first, then Jaden Bradley, then Gavin Thompson, a walk-on, then Jalen Barden, Miles Alston, Josh Junko, Jake McConaughey, Addison Copeland, the freshman, Luke Del Gaudio, and then Jordan Addison before 2 more walk-ons, Peter Varzel and Isaiah Stewart, with a couple guys already separated out there, who was, I think, Jared Wayne. Yeah, Jared Wayne was already on a roster because he's a senior. Jordan Addison went late because it's good strategy. It would be bad strategy to draft Jordan Addison early because he's not going to play much, if at all. And if it was me, I don't even know if I'd run him out there on the field at all. Maybe just 1 or 2 plays to give the fans a little something to ooh and ah about, but that would be it. And I would almost consider putting him in a red jersey. To be honest, he's that important, he's that good, and he needs so little of this, spring practice and spring game that I would put him in a red jersey and be no contact. You don't touch number 3. And I don't think that's a bad idea. And I would have him out there, like I say, for maybe 1 series, and then he'd be gone. And the players know that. You know what I mean? The guys who are drafting the teams know that, and that's why they didn't take him. That's why Konate Mumfield was the number 1 pick at wide receiver, because he's going to be, he's going to play, and I think he impressed his teammates and really showed how good he can be. And we've talked about Mumfield as a transfer from Akron. We've talked about him even since before he committed to Pitt. I sat here and said, look, I think he is one of the best wide receivers available in the transfer portal, both for what he's done in his career, his 1 year at Akron, kind of his skill set, and the fact that he's got a few years left. It's a multi-year investment in Konate Mumfield. And he got here, and he's lived up to every bit of it. And you watch some of the videos we put up on Panther-Lair.com. You watch, you read some of the things we've written, or some of the things that people have said, coaches have said. I mean, he has lived up to it. Really sharp route runner, really good body control, good hands. He's got like explosive speed. I mean, he's a really good wide receiver. And when you put him with Jordan Addison and Jared Wayne on the field together in the fall, and then occasionally mix in a Jaden Bradley or a Jalen Barden, you get Gavin Bartholomew out there, you get the backs as targets coming out of the backfield. You've got a lot of receiving targets on this team. You've got a lot of guys who can make plays in the passing game. And Konate Mumfield, I think, is going to be one of the breakout players on offense for Pitt this season. I really do. He might be number 1 on my list of breakout players for Pitt, unless you would consider like a Jared Wayne still being possible of having a breakout season, which I think you can make a case for it. I think he's been pretty good, but he could be even better. But I think Konate Mumfield's going to be that breakout guy in 2022. I really think he's got the ability to do that, and I think the fact that he was the first wide receiver drafted speaks to it. He has come in, he has impressed his teammates, he's impressed his coaches, and he's made plays. And I would expect that to happen again on Saturday. Mumfield, and Wayne, that's your gold team wide receivers is Konate Mumfield and Jared Wayne, along with Gavin Thompson, Miles Alston, Jake McConaughey, Luke Delgadio, and Peter Vardzell. So you're really looking at 3 scholarship guys and 4 walk-ons. But I think Wayne and Mumfield are good enough on their own. They'll make plays and catch passes and get in the end zone potentially on Saturday. On the other side, you get Jaden Bradley and Jalen Barden, and Addison Copeland and Jordan Addison as the 4 scholarship receivers on that side, on the blue team. I like Bradley and Barden a lot. I've talked about those guys a lot. I mean, if you've read Panther-Lair.com, if you listen to these shows, I've talked about those guys a lot. I think they're going to be really good. I think Jaden Bradley will make plays on Saturday. He's a guy to keep an eye on. Number 81. I just like the other group a little bit better. Just a little bit. I think, so we haven't talked about the quarterbacks, right? And you're going to see the quarterbacks on Saturday. This isn't going to, oh, goodness. Got the hiccups. Terrible time to have the hiccups. This isn't going to be like last year, where Kenny Pickett hardly ever played in the spring game, because he shouldn't play in the spring game. Keaton Slovis, Nick Patty are going to play in the spring game. And fortunately, maybe for everyone, those guys are both seniors, so the coaches were able to draft them out. So Slovis was drafted to Frank Signetti's blue team, which is interesting. It's interesting. And Nick Patty was drafted to Charlie Partridge's gold team. And it's interesting, and they would never tell us, but I wonder who got picked first. Like, if they really went back and forth, and maybe they didn't. Maybe they just sort of split them up and said, here, let's just do it this way. But if they actually drafted these guys out, I wonder who got picked first of the quarterbacks, Slovis or Patty. Because if it's Slovis, that means that Frank Signetti would have picked him. Frank Signetti being the head coach of the Blue. I hadn't really thought about this angle before. I'm guessing it's not as much of a draft as it is for the players when the players draft out their teams. But it's interesting that Slovis ended up on Signetti's team. Anyway, I think Slovis is the better quarterback. I think he's going to be Pitt's starting quarterback this year. I think he's the best option. But like I say, he's got that blue team offensive line in front of him against that gold team defensive line. I just don't like that matchup. I'll take Nick Patty with a little bit better protection thrown to Konate Mumfield and Jared Wayne. And I think that gives the gold team a pretty significant advantage. I really do. In addition to that, gold team has Vincent Davis and Izzy Abanikanda at running back. But I'll tell you what, we're talking about guys to watch, breakout guys you want to keep an eye on Saturday. Watch number 40 on the blue team, Daniel Carter. This is one of the surprise stars of spring camp. I'll tell you that. And you know what? If you really want to get down to it, on Saturday they'll announce the Ed Conway Award winners, most improved players of spring. They do this every year. And they do one for offense, one for defense, sometimes one for special teams. I think, I always like to make a pick. And I'm guessing that the offensive Ed Conway Award winner for most improved player of spring is going to be Daniel Carter. Defense, I'm not quite as sure about. I'm guessing Brandon George. I don't know why. Just kind of have a hunch there. No inside info or anything like that. Just a hunch that they're going to pick Brandon George. But I think Daniel Carter will be the guy on offense. He's gotten a lot of positive talk this spring, and it seems like he's had a really good spring. And so he would be one that I would definitely keep an eye on Saturday. Largely because he's the main running back on the blue team. The blue team has two running backs. They have Daniel Carter and Angelo Priore, who I think is a fullback. So they really only have one tailback on that team. The other team has Vincent Davis, Izzy Abanikanda, and Justin Collins, who I believe is a walk-on. And so, there's not a lot there, Rodney Hammond being out. But I think Daniel Carter could have a big spring game on Saturday, provided the protection, the blocking holds up. Again, he's running behind that blue team offensive line, and I think both offensive lines have some issues, but I think blue is going to be worse than gold. So it might be tough for Carter to get anything going. All right, those are just a few thoughts. I've got more things to say about that, but let's get into the comments and questions here in the chat. Of course, with our super chatters, RJCman38 starting off. Listen, if you want to be a super chatter, I always say, it's fun to have these conversations back and forth. You post comments and questions in the chat here, and we can, we go back and forth about it, and it's fun. It's like we have a little conversation. It's a little interaction. If you want to make sure your comment or your question gets read, make sure your question gets answered, your comment gets addressed, you can be super chatter. You click the little dollar sign at the bottom there, throw a couple bucks at the podcast, support us. We really appreciate it. And, it's an opportunity, and we'll make sure we get to your comment or question. So like RJCman38 starts it off and asks, hey, Chris, can you do a Q&A podcast with Frank Signetti? I would like to. I think that'd be a lot of fun. I don't, the Pitt coaches aren't always game for that kind of thing. For a lot of reasons, I think. It would be, I think it would be tricky to tie something like that down right now. The coaches obviously are finishing up spring camp, and then pretty much as soon as they're done, they're going to go out on the road and do recruiting evaluations. That's what happens basically from now through the end of May, is the coaches go out on the road, and they go into high schools, and they go see recruits in action and make decisions on offers, and you'll see a lot of offers go out over the next month and a half. And Signetti's certainly going to be out looking at quarterbacks. I think he's going to have a lot of guys that he's going to be looking at either to confirm offers, guys he has offered that he wants to see in person just to be sure about, and guys that he wants to offer in some of the younger classes, or maybe find some new guys that he wants to offer. So that's, he's going to be busy, I guess is what I'm saying. But we'll see what we can do. We don't often get a lot from the Pitt coaches during the offseason, but we'll see what we can do. Josh Newark says, having 3 starting offensive linemen out of the spring game, should we be worried about any injuries heading into the fall? So that, that list again of guys who are out for the spring game due to injury: Tyler Bentley, Judson Tallender, Jake Cradle, Gabe Hoy, Owen Drexel, Branson Taylor, Rodney Hammond, Nate Yarnell, Terrence Moore, Buddy Mack, Marquand Pope, Javante Royal, Stephon Hall, and Talon Brooks. 14 guys there's no indication that I've gotten that any of those injuries are serious enough that they should cost somebody playing time in the fall. During spring camp, coaches will err on the side of caution as much as they possibly can. They will hold guys who are questionable, hold guys who are less than 100%, hold guys to be safe. Particularly a starter like Owen Drexel or Gabe Hoy or Jake Cradle. They'll err on the side of caution, especially if it's a veteran guy and an experienced guy that they know they're going to be counting on in the fall. They don't want to take chances. And so every spring, the walking wounded on the sideline is a pretty big number. And it's not necessarily that those guys, I think the thing coaches always say is, well, if we had a game tomorrow, this guy could probably play or that guy could probably play. But the reality is they don't have a game tomorrow. They don't have a game until September 1st. And so there's no reason to risk it with these guys. And out of these 14 players who are out for Saturday, like I say, there hasn't been any real indication that any of those guys will be out into the season. They should all be back for training camp. This is what it seems. We'll see what develops. Joe New says, new t-shirt. I don't know if it's necessarily new, Joe. It's just it's a classic Dead Berry Dead shirt. I don't even think this company's around anymore. It's one of my favorite t-shirts. I've had it for a very long time, but I don't even think the company's in business anymore, or the brand of Dead Berry Dead. But I'm a big fan of the shirt. It's a really good t-shirt, and that's what I happen to be wearing tonight. David Murphy says, okay, I need some Pitt basketball news to make me hopeful so my hopes can be dashed again. It's what we do. What transfers can we realistically land to combine with Jamarius Burton, Nike Sabandi, John Hughley? Well, they got Nelly Cummings. And I guess this happened on Friday, right? So we haven't done a show since Nelly Cummings committed to Pitt as a transfer from Colgate. Local kid, Western PA native, went to Bowling Green for a year, transferred to Colgate. And it will come to Pitt to be the point guard. If you wanted Pitt to get a point guard on this roster, that's what Nelly Cummings is. It's what he's going to do at Pitt. That's what they brought him in to do. That's what they're bringing him in to do, is be a point guard and run the offense. With Burton and Sabandi playing off the ball, Hughley, of course, at center, and then finding a power forward to slot in there, to play with Hughley. Play next to Hughley and finish, plays from Cummings and the rest of the guards. So that's one. Of course, they also lost Femi Odikale. That finally came to pass. I kept saying that until he announces that he's transferring, as far as I'm concerned, he's still on the team. Well, he announced that he was transferring, so now he's gone. They're down to just a handful of guys, but it's still mostly, it's not the core that you hoped you would have. You hoped and believed you would have, I think the coaches hoped they would have a core that included Femi Odikale and Ethiel Horton. It doesn't now. Now that core is just Burton, Sabandi, and Hughley, basically. Plus Nate Santos and Will Jeffress off the bench. So, now Nelly Cummings is joining that group. It's a small group. You only need a couple guys to play with, but you need more than they have right now. They need a power forward. That's the next priority. Power forward and a shooter, if you can get one. Joe New says, Narduzzi's secrecy is part of the reason why there are empty seats. So, this is an interesting... This is something I go back and forth about, Joe New. And I've gone back and forth about this for years. Whether it was Dave Wanstead shutting down practices at various points, Todd Graham shutting down all practices, Paul Christ opening all practices and then shutting them down through the season, or Pat Narduzzi just giving the media a half hour of practice every day. I go back and forth, and I've had conversations with people about the impact of access as it relates to fan enthusiasm and fan interest and fan engagement. If Chris Peak, if I can walk in and watch all of Pitt's practice, right? and write down everything that happens and give you a detailed report, not necessarily giving away plays or tricks or anything like that, but just that, like, this guy looks really good, this guy beat that guy, this guy made a good play, this guy made a bad play, that kind of stuff. Pat Narduzzi doesn't want that kind of stuff out there, so we know where he stands on it. But you as a fan, is that going to draw you to the game more? If I spend all offseason writing about Konate Mumfield being awesome, or Jordan Addison being awesome, or Izzy Abanikanda breaking runs all over the place, how many season tickets is that worth? Like, how many season tickets is that going to sell? And I go back and forth about it. I mean, I think there is something to be said for, providing access to media so media can provide coverage, so people are writing about you more, so people are talking about you more, and naturally sort of driving interest that way. I think there's something to be said for that. Quantifying that interest and how much you actually get out of it, I don't know. I don't know. I go back and forth about it. Because again, look, 2007, we watched every single minute of every single offseason practice. Every one. We were in that building all day long. They would have 2 days in August, and I would get to that building around 8 a.m., and I would be there until like 6 o'clock at night. I practically worked there. I mean, I did work there, but I didn't work there. You know what I mean? I worked. I did work there, but I didn't actually work there. I wasn't an employee of Pitt. You follow what I'm saying? I was there all day long. And they went 5-7 that year. 2 years later, 2009, I was there for every minute of every off-season practice, spring and summer. Again, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. and all that stuff. Some of the nonsense I would get. I'm not even going to get into some of the stories of sitting in the media room down there with Paul Zeiss and Kevin Gorman. And Ask me another time for some of the things that went on there as we tried to kill time in between 2-day practices. But every minute of every practice, and they went 10-3 that year. My presence at practice did not impact the team one bit. The presence of the media for every minute of practice did not change anything. Just like 2017, we watched the first 5 periods of every practice in the offseason, and they went 5-7. Last year we watched the first 30 minutes of the first 5 periods of every practice in the offseason, and they went 11-3. It didn't matter. It doesn't matter. And I don't know, I know it doesn't have any impact on what the team does on the field. It doesn't impact the team performance. And I don't really know how much it impacts the fan engagement. I think it's better to have more coverage of your team. I think it's better to have more people writing about your team. I think it's better to have more people talking about your team. I think those are all good things. But ultimately, the ones who control fan engagement and fan interest and fan ticket sales are Pitt by winning games. You need to go out and win games. You go 6-5 in 2020. Well, the interest level wasn't low heading into 2021 because I wasn't at practice. That wasn't why interest was low. Interest was low because they went 6-5 the year before. So, I go back and forth about that. A lot. Let's see here. Joe New says the vanilla spring game leads to unprepared team for the first real game. I don't think that's true. I mean, you're talking about 5 months apart. I don't think there's really an impact there to carry over there. Joe New says most years Pitt has looked unprepared for the first game of the season. No, I mean I think what you're talking about when Pitt has looked, as you said, unprepared for the first game of the season, for the most part, you're talking about games against Villanova, Albany, Youngstown State twice, and then that might have been it. Right, 2019 they played Virginia in the opener. This past year, UMass. All those games were situations where they were trying to play with like half a playbook. It's not about the vanilla spring game. It's about going vanilla in that first game and trying to stay vanilla and not show anything. That's why I think they end up going to overtime against Youngstown State and winning their other Youngstown State game by 1 score, by not looking all that great against Albany, not looking all that great against Villanova. They looked pretty good against UMass last year, I guess, but this is what they've done, and that's why they haven't looked great in the season openers. And, Virginia in 2019, Virginia was just better. They won the Coastal that year. So I don't think that had anything to do with what they did in the spring game. Let's see here. Scroll down through the question. It's a lot of just Joe New and RJC Man 38 talking back and forth to each other. Let's see. What else do we have? Josh Newark says, over under 1.5 wide receivers with 1,000 yards. Boy, that's an interesting question. I mean, I don't think they're going to have 2 1,000-yard receivers for a couple of reasons. Not that I think... Not that I don't think they have players capable of it. I think if it was last year's offense, I think they would have been, if they had Kenny Pickett and a pass-happy offense like what Mark Whipple ran, I think they would have a chance at 2,000-yard receivers, but they also might spread the ball around too much to make that happen. You know what I mean? Jordan Addison will go over 1,000 yards, but like Mumfield and Wayne, and then, the tight ends, Bartholomew, throwing Bradley and Barden. I think they're just spread the ball around too much for any other guy to get 1,000 yards. This year, I really think, I don't think they're just blowing smoke when they talk about recommitting to the running game. Andre Powell had something to say on Tuesday. He said, they were pretty effective at running the ball last year. They just didn't do it much. And so he thinks they'll be just as good running the ball. He doesn't think they're necessarily going to be better at running the ball. They're just going to do it more often. They're going to be more committed to it. Was sort of what he said. And I think that makes sense. And I don't think they're just blowing smoke. Now, I don't think they're going to go 3 yards in a cloud of dust. I don't think they're going to go away from the passing game altogether. They still have a Biletnikoff Award winner. They still have a really good receiver who came in as a transfer. Jared Wayne is still really good. Gavin Bartholomew can make plays as a pass-catching tight end. They still have good weapons, and I think they're going to throw the ball. And I think when you look at Pitt in 2009, the last time Frank Signetti came in as a coordinator, they still threw the ball a lot. They were committed to the running game. They had a running back go for 1,700 yards or something, but they also had Jonathan Baldwin. I think he went over 1,000 receiving yards, and Doran Dickerson had 10 touchdowns or something like that. So they still were effective in throwing the ball, but they just had more balance in the offense than I think what you saw last year. I think this team has the personnel, receivers and running backs, to have a really balanced, explosive offense where they can kind of pick and choose and dictate what they want to do. They can slow the game down and grind you down with the running game, but then they can also attack vertical and strike quick, I think, with the passing game. Just looking at the weapons in the receiver room and the running back room. Now, you need a quarterback who's going to get the ball to them. You need a quarterback who's going to make all those things happen. And you'll get a chance to see Keaton Slovis and Nick Patty on Saturday in the Blue Gold game. I don't know if either guy is Kenny Pickett. I don't know if either guy is Kenny Pickett circa 2021. But I think I think you can win with both guys. I think Slovis might give you a little more upside in the passing game, but I think you can win with both guys. I don't think they're going away from... the passing game entirely. They just want to have more balance and run it a little bit more because they've got the horses to do it. They've got the backs to do it. Like Josh Newark asks, is Daniel Carter a running back, a fullback, or a hybrid? I mean, I think he's really getting more work at tailback. I think he could be like an H-back. I think he could play as a fullback. He's a bigger back, so he can do some of those things. But I think they are using him at tailback. I mean, you look at the draft for the Blue Gold game, he's the only tailback on the Blue roster, so on the Blue team. So, I think that is the role that he's going to have. I think they're going to try and get him involved carrying the ball, which now gives you 4 backs, between Izzy Benekanda, Vincent Davis, Rodney Hammond, and Carter. I think they're going to try and really get the running game going with that stable of backs. Brock Madonic says, have you confirmed any basketball visitors for Pitt from the transfer portal once the dead period ends? No, we haven't confirmed any yet. They might have a couple set up. They got a lot of guys they're after. There are a lot of guys they're talking to. There are a lot, and every day new guys go into the portal, and Pitt jumps out and reaches out to him. Now, I will say this. All right, I do want to point this out. When guys go into the transfer portal, and this goes for football as well, in addition to basketball, all these coaching staffs have assistants who are monitoring the portal all the time. You know what I mean? Like monitoring the portal pretty much constantly. And they see when new guys go in. They see, when new players are available, and they'll hit them up. They'll reach out. Hey, just want to say hello. See if you have any interest in Pitt. Just keep in touch with us. Let us know what's going on. And that interest might be sincere. That interest might be just touching base, just setting up an initial line of communication. Not all of the initial reach outs. Like you'll see a tweet of so-and-so said that he has heard from this school, this school, this school, this school, and this school since going into the transfer portal yesterday. Well, he probably has. All those schools have probably reached out, but a lot of them have probably just reached out just to reach out, just to establish a starting point and say hello, and it doesn't necessarily make them a priority. So there's a lot to sift through when you're trying to cover a team attacking the transfer portal. And you get a sense when guys emerge as higher end targets, like a Nelly Cummings did before he committed, or Jason Roche from the Citadel, where they set up a Zoom call with him from the Final Four last week, and all this stuff. Some of those guys emerge as more prominent targets than other guys who maybe are just getting a cursory hello. And maybe they'll double back on them later. But no, so to answer your question, Brock, I haven't confirmed any basketball visitors yet. It's been wild to keep track of, but those will start up in a couple days. They'll start having recruits on campus, transfers on campus. We'll see what kind of visits, what kind of visits they have set up. Let's see here. Joe News says Daniel Carter is Frank Cignetti's type of player. We'll have a meaningful fullback role once again. Maybe. I mean, we'll see. I think Carter will do some of that stuff. Really, like if you look at last year's offense, there was a whole lot that Gavin Bartholomew did where he was lining up at effectively a fullback spot. Just as much, if not more, than he lined up at tight end. And with Lucas Krull gone, you got to think Carter or Bartholomew is going to be doing more sort of traditional inline tight end and lining up in the slot and playing more as a tight end. I think, that's going to leave open if they want to do some of the same things personnel-wise that the offense did last year. And I think Frank Cignetti does want to carry some things over. If they want to do some of those things personnel-wise that they did last year, they're going to need someone to fill that fullback, H-back role. And I think Carter could work there. I think he would be a good option out of that spot. But I don't know that he's going to be exclusively a traditional fullback. I think his role might move a little bit, move around a little bit more. Let's see here. Brock McDonagh asks, thoughts on the recruit that Pat Narduzzi and Mike Bell tweeted about. Is he a realistic target for Pitt? Yeah, that's Caleb Cost. He's a defensive back recruit from the state of Georgia. He's also a baseball player. And he visited on Tuesday. Actually, I think he went home today. There were like 3 guys from Georgia who visited the last couple days. And Cost is getting recruited by both, by Pitt football and Pitt baseball. So Pat Narduzzi was tweeting about him being a center fielder who plays defensive back. Mike Bell, Pitt's baseball coach, tweeted about getting a defensive back who plays center field. Now, they can't name these guys when they're talking about them in tweets, but the tweets were clearly about Caleb Cost. And yeah, I mean, I think if you can get a guy to come from Georgia to Pittsburgh on an unofficial visit, which means he pays his way to go. He pays room, board, lodging, travel, all that stuff. If you can get a guy to do that, to come all that way on his own, there's genuine interest, and I think there's genuine interest from Caleb Cost. I think it's a realistic possibility. Let's see what else. Pitman Zach94 says, I saw there's a new running back, Justin Collins. I'm assuming he's a walk-on. Yeah, I have to do some research on Justin Collins and figure out who he is. He got drafted today, as a running back, joined the gold team. I'm not really sure who he is. It's the first time I really heard his name or saw his name, but the rest of the team seemed really excited when he got drafted. So I don't know what the story is there. There might be something to dig into and find a little bit more story on that one. We'll have to see what we can turn up. Maybe I'll have something for you next week on that. And then RJC Man 38 says, how good is the depth chart this year compared to previous years? Well, one thing is they are deeper this year overall because they have more players in spring camp. Now, when you have 14 guys who are out due to injury, including 3 offensive linemen, your depth is going to take a few hits. But I think overall, in terms of numbers, they're better off than they were in previous years. And I think, it's hard to say like across the board, depth is better or depth is worse. I think when they get the whole team together and everyone's healthy, the depth at offensive line is better than it's been in a while. I think the depth at defensive line is better than it has been in a while. I think the depth at running back is really good. I think the depth in the secondary is pretty good. Not necessarily better than it's been in a long time, but pretty good. They obviously have some depth questions at linebacker, not necessarily due to numbers, but just due to experience. And the wide receivers, You've got 5 really good guys that I think you can rely on or expect to be able to rely on of varying degrees of experience. You've got 5, I think, pretty good guys. That's not that many. So I think receiver is a position where you have a lot of talent, but not necessarily a lot of depth. Tight end, kind of the same thing, although I think the guys behind Gavin Bartholomew will be okay. So you go position by position really to ascertain whether you think the depth chart is better or worse. You know what I mean? Is it good? Is it better this year, or is it better, or is it worse? It's better at some spots and it's not at others. Is reality, and that's not a cop-out answer. It's just the truth. You know what I mean? Like the defensive line is really deep. Linebackers not so much. And that's just the reality. So what could you even say the front 7 depth chart is better or worse? I couldn't say that because I would say the defensive line depth chart is better and the linebacker depth chart is not. Right now, I think that can improve over a course of time, but that's how I would answer that question. How good is the depth chart compared to previous years? That's what I would say. I would say you go by position by position. All right, we're definitely going to have position by position breakdowns here throughout the weekend after the spring game and into next week as we recap spring camp. I can't believe it's almost over. One more practice here on Thursday, and then the spring game on Saturday, 1 o'clock at Heinz Field, blue, gold. On the field, your chance to see Keaton Slovis, your chance to see Nick Patty, your chance to see Kanate Mumpfield, your chance to see a lot of guys you've been hearing about. Bam Breema, number 57, Daniel Carter, number 40, Rylan Gandy, number 18, right? I always confuse him and Bigelow. Yeah, Rylan Gandy, number 18, the freshman who came in. Sam Okunlola, number 17, the freshman who came in. They had a lot of freshmen come in. Shane Simon, the transfer, number 32. They had a lot of freshmen. They had a lot of transfers come in this offseason. And this is your chance to see those guys. 1 o'clock, Heinz Field on Saturday. Should be a lot of fun. We'll have more preview content leading up to the spring game. We'll have all kinds of recaps after the spring game on Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you subscribe to the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. And subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. This is what I ask you to do every week. I really appreciate it. Like the video. We really appreciate that. Subscribe to the video. Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you get notifications. These things would all make me very happy. So I'm asking you to help out on that front. Thanks again to everybody who tuned in tonight. It's been a lot of fun hanging out, as always, having these conversations. We always enjoy it. Don't forget, Saturday morning, 8 a.m., Panthers Insider Show on Sports Radio 93.7 The Fan. So we've got that going on also, which is nice. Make sure you tune in for all those things. Thanks again. I appreciate everybody who checks out the podcast every week. Hope you have a great rest of the night. Hope you have a great rest of the week. We'll talk to you again next Wednesday night. See you later.